The night Jae-Ren Maddox walked into Selene Voss's bakery at 2 a.m., she didn't scream. That was the first thing that caught him off guard. Most people saw the scar running from his left jaw to his collarbone, a relic from the night he had taken over the most feared Korean syndicate in Southeast Asia at just 23, and immediately found religion. Grown men had wept in his presence. Crime lords from Seoul to Bucharest had begged on their knees when his black SUVs pulled up outside their doors. He was the head of the Maddox Jeon organization, a hybrid empire built on Korean discipline and Western ruthlessness, feared across 3 continents. But this woman, this tall, deep brown-skinned woman with thick natural hair pinned beneath a wrap, dusted in flour with a smear of dark chocolate on her jaw, just looked up from her mixing bowl and said, "We're closed." Jae-Ren stepped fully inside, his 2 men flanking the door. "I'm aware." "Then you can read, good for you." She turned back to her dough. Behind him, his enforcer Ruck made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. Jae-Ren silenced him with a look, that particular look his men called the freeze, borrowed from his late Korean grandfather, who had built the syndicate's first chapter in Busan. He had come for one reason, the building. It sat on the corner of Veslin Street and Cord Avenue, prime real estate bordering his newest acquisition, a laundering front disguised as a luxury hotel. He needed this corner. He had already bought out every other tenant on the block. This woman, Selene Voss, had refused 3 offers, each one significantly more than the property's worth. He approached the counter. She didn't flinch. "You've been ignoring my lawyers," he said. "I've been declining your lawyers," she corrected, still not looking up. "There's a difference." He studied her. Strong jaw, high cheekbones that caught the low kitchen light beautifully, dark eyes that held something ancient and immovable in them. She couldn't have been older than 28. The bakery smelled of warm vanilla, toasted coconut, and cardamom, deep, rich warmth woven into something entirely her own, grotesquely comforting against the cold danger he carried into the room. "Name your price," he said. She finally looked at him fully. Her eyes were very dark, deep brown, almost black, the kind that absorbed light rather than reflected it, and completely unafraid. "This bakery belonged to my mother. She built it after my father disappeared. She came to this country with nothing but her recipes and her 2 bare hands. She worked 12-hour days in this kitchen until her knuckles cracked and bled, and she never, not once, complained." Her voice was steady as stone. "She died 6 months ago. It is everything she left me. There is no price." The room was very quiet. Jae-Ren Maddox was not accustomed to being told no. He was even less accustomed to feeling anything in response to it. But something about the way she said there is no price, not desperately, not dramatically, just plainly, like a law of the universe that required no defense, lodged itself beneath his ribs like a splinter he couldn't reach. He straightened his cufflinks, platinum, engraved with the Jun family crest. "I'll be back." "I'll be here," she said, already turning back to her dough. He walked out into the cold night air, and for the first time in 11 years of running an empire built on fear and silence, Jae-Ren Maddox felt something he couldn't name. He thought about it the entire drive home. He was still thinking about it at dawn. 3 weeks later, Selene's ovens stopped working. Then her supplier contracts mysteriously vanished from the system. Then her business license was flagged for administrative review. Then the health inspector arrived unannounced, twice. She knew exactly who was behind it. What Jae-Ren Maddox didn't know was that Selene Voss had grown up watching her mother navigate a world that constantly tried to erase her, a black woman building something from nothing in a country that offered little softness to women who looked like her. Selene had learned early that pressure was simply a test of foundation. She borrowed a commercial oven from the church 2 blocks away, whose pastor had known her mother for 15 years. She sourced new suppliers through a local food cooperative. She filed her license appeal personally at City Hall, wearing her mother's favorite blouse for courage. She worked 20-hour days and kept the bakery open. When Jae-Ren received the report from his operations manager, he read it twice. "She's still open?" he asked. "Yes, sir, revenue is actually up. The neighborhood has been rallying around her. A local news outlet ran a piece." His manager hesitated. "Tell me the headlines." "Community bakery defies corporate pressure. Locals call it the little oven that could." Jae-Ren set the paper down slowly. He had been raised inside the Korean syndicate code. Resistance was either crushed or recruited. He had never encountered a third option. resistance that simply endured without agenda, without spectacle, with nothing but quiet and stubborn dignity. Something that felt dangerously close to admiration moved through him, unwelcome and unfamiliar. He went back to the bakery on a Tuesday afternoon. The place was small but full, an elderly woman sharing tea with a neighbor near the window, 2 university students splitting a pastry, a small girl pressing her nose against the glass display case with wide, wondering eyes. It smelled even better than he remembered. Selene saw him the moment he walked in. Her expression didn't shift. "The usual intimidation table, or will you actually order something?" she asked. He sat down at the nearest table without being invited. "Coffee, black." She brought it herself. He noticed her hands, the knuckles slightly raw, evidence of punishing hours. She set the cup down without ceremony and turned to leave. "I didn't do this to punish you," he said quietly. She stopped. "Then what did you call it?" "Business." She turned around slowly. Her eyes were very calm and very dangerous in the way that deep water is dangerous. "My mother's hands looked like mine do right now for 20 years, so I could have something that was mine. You spent 3 weeks trying to destroy it with a phone call." Her voice never rose. "Don't talk to me about business." She walked away before he could respond. He sat in her bakery for 40 minutes. He drank 2 coffees. He left an envelope on the table before he walked out, not an offer this time. A single piece of paper with 1 sentence written in his own handwriting, in both English and Korean. "I'm sorry, that's not something I say. Ko mienhepnidain, ko itanein, ko matunain, ko hudiein, ko ennenain, ko setamipnidain." Selene found it after he left. She stood in the middle of her kitchen for a long time, reading the line she couldn't understand, the Korean, and feeling strangely that it was the more honest of the two. She put it in the drawer where she kept her mother's old recipes. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself that twice. Jae-Ren had a rule: never get personal. In 11 years leading the Maddox Jeon organization, he had never broken it. He had been groomed from boyhood in the Korean syndicate code, chamster, endure without expression, gang harder, be strong without exception. His grandfather had drilled it into him in a cold Busan warehouse before he could properly read. His father had reinforced it until the day he died, because of a woman, his empire nearly crumbling because love had made him blind and slow and predictable. Jae-Ren had sworn at 17, standing over his father's grave in the January cold, that he would never be that man. And yet, he found himself researching Selene Voss, not through his intelligence team, alone quietly in his private study at 3 in the morning when he couldn't sleep. He learned that her father, Damon Voss, had disappeared when she was 9. No body ever found. Her mother, Kala Voss, had raised her alone, built the bakery from nothing, and died of heart failure at 54. Selene had a degree in biochemistry she had never used, a shelf full of botany books, and a small apartment above the bakery. No close friends, no boyfriend, no obvious vulnerabilities. She was, by every measure, alone. And she had chosen to be. He recognized that, more than he wanted to. When his second-in-command, Orville, asked why the Veslin Street acquisition was stalled, Jae-Ren said simply, "We're taking a different angle." "What angle?" "I haven't decided yet." Orville studied him with the careful eyes of a man who had worked beside Jae-Ren for 9 years and survived by reading every room perfectly. "She's just one woman." "I know what she is," Jae-Ren said. What he didn't say was that she had appeared in his dream the night before, not seductively, not dramatically, just standing in her kitchen with flour on her dark hands, telling him something he couldn't hear. He had woken up reaching for words that weren't there. He ordered her building surveilled, not for threats, not for leverage. He told himself it was habit, syndicate protocol, nothing personal. But each morning when the report came in, subject opened at 5 a.m., accepted delivery, assisted elderly neighbor with groceries, closed at 9 p.m., he read it like it was something sacred. Because somewhere beneath the empire, the scar, and the boy who had been handed his grandfather's ring at 17 with blood still on the floor, something in him recognized her. A person who had survived devastation and built something beautiful in its wreckage. He had built an empire in his. They were not so different. That thought terrified him more than anything had in a decade. What Jae-Ren's surveillance didn't catch was what happened after midnight. When the bakery was dark and the street was quiet, Selene would descend to the basement not for baking. The basement held something her mother had left her, not a recipe, a box. Inside the box were documents, photographs, and a hand-drawn map of a building Selene had spent 3 years slowly and carefully identifying. Her father hadn't disappeared. He had been taken. Calla Voss had known. She had spent years quietly, obsessively gathering information, names, dates, transactions, hiding it inside recipe cards between measurements and baking times. She had written it all in a private language only Selene could decode, a mother-daughter cipher invented during years when fear made speaking plainly dangerous. Jae-Ren Voss had been an accountant, a very good one. He had worked for a man he believed was a legitimate businessman until he understood what the money actually was: Korean syndicate funds being laundered through a chain of international front companies. He had tried to leave. He had kept copies of financial records as insurance. He had not been careful enough. The man who had ordered his disappearance had a name. A name Selene had finally confirmed 6 months ago, 1 month before her mother died, as though Calla had held on just long enough to make sure her daughter had the truth. The name was Cassin Frey, a half-Korean, half-European fixer who had operated as the previous regime's most ruthless enforcer before the Maddox Jeon organization had restructured its power. A ghost who had gone quiet. A man kept alive out of old, complicated syndicate debt. Jae-Ren hadn't ordered her father's disappearance. He had been 16 years old when it happened, still training in his grandfather's compound in Busan. But Cassin Frey was someone Jae-Ren still sheltered, an old ghost under his protection, a secret Selene now held in a basement box surrounded by her dead mother's handwriting. She didn't know what to do with it yet. She only knew 2 things. She could not sell the building because she needed the basement, and she could not run because running meant losing the only thread that connected her to her father's fate. So when Jae-Ren came back a 4th time, she poured him coffee. And she watched him like she was reading a map. He asked her to dinner, she almost said no. She said yes because she needed to know how close he kept Cassin Frey. She told herself that, she was very firm about it. The restaurant he chose was quiet and private, minimalist in the way of high-end Korean dining, dark polished wood and soft lighting, and the faint scent of chrysanthemum tea drifting from a corner burner. No visible security, though she counted 4 of his men at perimeter tables. He arrived exactly on time, which surprised her. He held her chair, which surprised her more. "You didn't think I had manners," he said, reading her expression. "I thought you had enforcers instead." "I have both." The ghost of a smile crossed his angular face. "In Korean culture we call it yui courtesy. Even my grandfather, who was a deeply feared man, bowed to every elder he met. Some things survive the life you choose." She studied him across the low candlelight, this Korean man with a dynasty in his eyes and a scar that told a story he had never offered anyone. She had not expected him to speak of his culture with something that sounded like complicated, unresolved pride. He told her nothing personal about his operations, but she noticed what he ordered: the dish without shellfish, which she had mentioned in a single offhand sentence 3 weeks prior. He had remembered. "You have a file on me," she said. "I do. That doesn't bother you to admit. Would it change anything if I pretended otherwise?" She considered him. "Why do you want the building so much, the real reason?" Something shifted in his face, nearly imperceptible. "The corner is important for a project." "You own 3 city blocks, you could redesign around mine." Her voice stayed even. "So why mine specifically?" The silence stretched long and deliberate. "Because you were the only one who said no," he said finally, quietly, "and I needed to understand why." He paused. "In my world resistance means threat, but you weren't a threat. You were just immovable. I've never met immovable before." She felt the pull of him then, not because he was powerful, but because beneath the empire and the carefully managed danger of him, she recognized something she had seen only in the mirror. A person who had been alone for a very long time and built walls so high they had forgotten what it was to let anyone see them. She drove home reminding herself why she had gone. Cassin Frey, her father, the box in the basement. But his words stayed with her through the night. "I've never met immovable before." She was terrified by how much she wanted to believe he meant more than the building. It was Ruck who broke it. Orville later told Jae-Ren that someone had gotten careless. A junior member talked too much in the wrong bar in the Korean district, where Cassin Frey still had ears sewn into the walls like old stitches that never fully healed. By the time Jae-Ren found out, 3 things had already happened. Frey had learned someone was investigating the Voss disappearance, Frey had sent men to Veslin Street, and Selene's bakery window had been shattered at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. Jae-Ren received the call while in a board meeting. He was on his feet before the sentence finished. He arrived to find Selene standing in the middle of her bakery, glass scattered around her shoes, holding a broom with the composed stillness of a woman who had decided not to fall apart in front of anyone. She looked up when he walked in. Her expression wasn't afraid. It was furious. "You brought this to me," she said. "I know. My mother's display case, the one she built herself." Her voice didn't break. That was almost worse than if it had. "The glass from it is on my floor." He didn't offer excuses. He stood in the destruction and felt something cold and absolute move through him, something his grandfather had a name for, Han, the particular Korean grief that lives deep in the body, the accumulated weight of wrongs that cannot be undone. He felt it now, unexpectedly, standing in a broken bakery that smelled of vanilla and shattered glass. "There's something you need to know," she said. She took him to the basement. He stood in the narrow basement light and read his way through his own history, Cassin Frey, the documents, the dates, the name Damon Voss. He read slowly, with the trained discipline of a man who had spent decades managing his reactions, but his jaw tightened. His hand, resting on the shelf beside him, closed into a quiet fist. "You've known," he said, "since before I came here. I found out who you were after your 3rd offer letter. You could have used this against me. I'm not interested in weapons." Her voice was completely steady. "I want to know where my father is, that is all I have ever wanted." He looked at her, this woman who had sat across from him at dinner, knowing what was in her basement, who had poured him coffee while carrying all of this alone, and felt the last of whatever careful distance he had maintained simply collapse. "I'll find out," he said. "Jae-Ren," she said his name for the first time, not formal, not weaponized, just his name, quiet and plain, like something ordinary and enormous at once. "Don't make me a promise because you feel guilty." "I'm not." He held her gaze, and something ancient and unbreakable moved through his expression. "I'm making it because it's right, and because Cassin Frey is about to discover what happens when he touches something that matters to me." The silence between them was different now, not empty, completely full. She nodded once. It was not gratitude. It was something far more serious than that. It was trust, offered by a woman who did not give it easily, to a man who had never known what to do with it. He left the basement understanding that everything had just changed. Cassin Frey was found 3 days later. Jae-Ren handled it personally and quietly, in the way that men raised inside Korean syndicate tradition handled debts of blood. No witnesses, no questions left standing. Whatever Frey confessed in those final hours, only Jae-Ren heard it, spoken in a language that carried the full weight of everything his grandfather had built and everything his father had lost. He came to the bakery on a grey Saturday morning, before opening. Selene answered the door in an old, oversized sweater, a mug of tea warming both her hands. She read his face before he spoke, those dark, steady eyes moving across his expression with the quiet precision of a woman who had learned to read silence a long time ago. "He's gone," she said. "Yes, my father." A pause that held an entire decade of grief inside it. He didn't survive the first year. Frey confirmed it. He watched her face carefully. "I'm sorry, Selene, I am genuinely sorry." She turned away from him slowly. He saw her shoulders rise and fall once, deliberately, controlled, the way people breathe when they are choosing not to shatter in front of someone. Then she was very still. "My mother knew," she said finally, her voice low. "I think she knew and kept looking anyway because looking felt like keeping him alive." She turned back around. Her eyes were wet but her voice never wavered. "I understand that now. I finally understand her." He didn't offer hollow comfort. He didn't reach for words that would have cheapened the moment. He simply stood in her doorway in the grey morning light and was present, Jokitda, his grandfather would have said. Simply being, the old Korean understanding that sometimes presence is the only honest offering. He reached into his jacket and placed a small envelope on the counter beside her. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single pressed chrysanthemum, dried, pale, impossibly delicate. In Korean tradition, it was a flower for remembrance, for the honored dead. For your mother, he said quietly, and for your father. Selene stared at the small flower for a long moment. Her breath caught, a small, private sound that she didn't try to hide. The building, he said. It's yours. I've withdrawn everything, the offers, the legal interference, the pressure, all of it. The paperwork is already drafted. No conditions, no strings. She looked at him for a long moment. Why? Because it was always yours. His voice was steady and certain, and because some things should never be bought. She stepped back and opened the door wider. He understood the invitation for what it was. He came inside. She made tea, a rich, spiced blend her mother had taught her, the smell of it filling the small kitchen like something remembered and sacred. He sat at the same table he always chose, nearest the window, where the morning light came in sideways and honest. It moved across the floor between them, crossing the distance, touching both their hands on the worn wooden table. It was ordinary and extraordinary in the way that only truly important moments are, the kind that don't announce themselves with drama or ceremony, only with the quiet certainty that something has shifted permanently and cannot be unshifted. They didn't speak about the future. They didn't need to. Some understandings live below language, in the space where two people who have each survived their own private devastation finally recognize each other without needing to explain it. When she set his cup down, her hand, dark and warm and slightly rough from years of honest work, brushed his. Neither of them moved away. Outside, the city moved in its relentless, indifferent way, loud and unknowing, caring nothing for the small extraordinary thing happening inside one bakery on Veslin Street. But inside, in the warmth and the spiced air and the memory of a mother who had built something from nothing and left it to her daughter like an inheritance of love, something was quietly, carefully beginning. Two people shaped by loss, two people fluent in solitude, two people who had built walls so high the sky had become unfamiliar, sitting together in the wreckage of everything that had led them here, with the morning light between them like a question neither had answered yet. Jae-Ren Maddox, Korean, ruthless, feared across 3 continents, heir to an empire built on blood and discipline, and the cold January grave of his father, sat in a black woman's kitchen drinking spiced tea, and for the first time in 17 years, felt something that resembled peace. He should have known better, because 3 time zones away, in a city he hadn't thought about in years, someone was opening a file. A file with his name on it, in Korean, and a photograph of the bakery on Veslin Street. The hunger for power is never satisfied, and the moment you find something worth protecting, that is precisely the moment someone decides to use it against you. The real game was just beginning.
Thank you for watching. Every story leaves something behind. Fragmented Rain is where the next one begins. New stories every week. Please subscribe for more.